So, sir, global financial centers are clustered around New York, London, and Asia Hub. Do you think Istanbul has the potential to fill the gap between these two hubs?
Well, first of all, let me clarify that the major financial centers like London, New York, Hong Kong, and Singapore are already very established. So the question that Turkey and Istanbul in particular need to ask is, do you want to overtake them, or do you want to play a supportive role being a financial center? My recommendation or my view is that Istanbul should play a supportive role because you are already maybe 30, 40 years behind in terms of the development. And therefore you need to kind of play what I would call a satellite financial center role, augmenting and complementing, let's say, London, which is the major financial hub for Europe, and then you have Hong Kong and Singapore for Asia. In between, you play the role. I feel that one role that Istanbul can play is really to be the financial hub to cover Central Asia. Now, I have, in this recent trip to Istanbul, asked some of my contacts what they view Istanbul's role is. And I get very mixed reaction. Some of them tell me that, oh, Istanbul is an ideal location to cover Africa, Middle East, and Europe. My question is, if this is the case, the challenge is that in the Middle East, you have Abu Dhabi, right? In Europe, you have London, you have Frankfurt, you have Paris, right? So the question is, what is your competitive advantage in terms of being ahead or superior relative to this? My view is that there is a gap here, and that is Central Asia. Istanbul is ideally situated to play the role as being an entry point into Central Asia. And I think, for Istanbul to succeed as what I call a satellite financial center, then you should focus on that role and play that role rather than to try to play a role of being a financial center for too big a region, because you need to focus.
Thank you. So, compared to other global financial centers, what are the advantages and disadvantages of Istanbul?
Well, first of all, Istanbul is, like I said, strategically located in the eastern part of Europe. You have access from a cultural standpoint, to Central Asia, both from a religion standpoint, from a cultural standpoint. You are very close to the Central Asian people, the country, the system, you know that well. So I think that is an advantage. The disadvantage, I would put it as, basically at the end of the day, you are kind of stuck in between London, Singapore, and Hong Kong in terms of time zone. You are just 2 hours behind London. You are 5 hours, behind. 2 hours ahead of London and 5 hours ahead of Asia. So really, I would say that Istanbul can try to fill in that gap, right? Your disadvantage is really, at the end of the day, what do you do in order to play that role, being a financial center? I don't think at this present moment, my understanding is that Istanbul or the authorities in Istanbul have a clear vision of how to play that role. You are still groping. You're still trying to discover what role can you play.
Thank you. So as the last one, Finance Office prepares a master action plan for Istanbul Finance Center project. What is your suggestions to be included to this action plan?
Okay. First of all, not just in terms of financial service. I've been asked this question about investments into Turkey. I find that one of the biggest challenge for any investors coming to Turkey is they feel that there is no consistency in your government policy. okay? And I think it is important because any form of investment, be it investments into factory, investments into financial service, asset management, whatever, it requires a 5-10 year view. And if the investors feel that there is no policy consistency, I cannot be sure that today if I come in, 2 years down the road, the policy remains the same, then it is very challenging. So I think that's the first thing is there has to be an element of policy consistency. Now, policy consistency does not mean that you have to have a democratic, liberal government policy. Take, for instance, China. China is very consistent because it is a communist country. They plan 5-10 years ahead. And people know, investors going to China know what to expect in 5 to 10 years. So I'm not talking about consistency from a standpoint of any form of government policy. I'm talking about you can adopt a certain policy, but you just have to be consistent. You have to follow through. The second remark that I want to make is that being a major financial center, and if Istanbul wants to be a major financial market, there are two things you need to look at. One is the hardware, okay? The hardware in terms of connectivity, in terms of communication, connectivity, and so on. So you need to build that hardware. But I think building the hardware is the easy bit, okay? The next is really building what I call the software, okay? I still remember, in early 2000, after the internet bubble burst, and in Asia we faced the SARS crisis, Singapore was confronted with this question of what do we do? And the challenge we faced then was we had Kuala Lumpur, we have Bangkok, we have Sydney, all aspiring to take over from Singapore as the major financial center, right? I was part of the subcommittee. We sat together and we said, what do we do? And we came to the conclusion that it's easy. Any country wanting to be a financial center can build the infrastructure, the hardware. The toughest part, and to be sustainable, is your software. And therefore involves a lot of people development, a lot of investments in people development. So really, I just used the Singapore experience. In the early 70s, we wanted to be a forex center. So we had spent a lot of time developing skills. In the 80s, we want to be an asset management. So this is why Singapore was one of the first CFA society outside of the United States, because they strongly encourage the development of people to learn about asset management, to participate through the CFA curriculum and program. So that's something that I think Istanbul, the Turkish government, need to promote. One of the challenges is this, that with software development, it's a changing dynamic. I look at it as every decade, something new will come along. Today, one of the challenges that Singapore faces is digital disruption, right? So the brick and mortar model of financial service is being disrupted by digital. So very rapidly, the Singapore government recognized this threat and 4 or 5 years ago, embarked on a very ambitious program to look at fintech. And today, Singapore is ranked number 5 in terms of being a fintech center in the world. And the Singapore government annually organizes a fintech festival in Singapore, which is already recognized as one of the highlights of the fintech industry in the world. Every year in September, there is a fintech festival, and this year, just past, a couple of weeks past, it attracted 45,000 participants from 135 countries. So again, when I talk about development of the software, it's not just developing what is existing. You need to be to recognize that even the training needs, the skill set keep evolving, keep changing. and you need to keep up. So it is a dynamic process.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
That was all. Thank you.
Thank you.